Nothing is certain except death and taxes. That line, which was written by Benjamin Franklin, but first appeared with a different wording in a 1716 play, The Cobbler of Preston, is a staple when discussing certainty. No one can know what's coming next. While I appreciate the satire that's allowed it to become so widespread for the true idea at its core, I've always been a bit annoyed that those two elements imply a specific context and allows it to be misused. Instead, I think we should collapse it down into a simpler form. Nothing is certain but change. There are various quotes to this effect, but finding an origin is just about impossible, often with a misattribution to the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus. But regardless of origin, I think this is one of those rare, simple statements that contains all the necessary logic and serves a great purpose from that. Because you can't deny that change is certainty when, well, life exists. When we, you and me, did not exist for millions of years, and then suddenly, like a spark lighting a bonfire from the mixture of two people's DNA, we grew from a mere handful of cells into an adult life form, fed by the nutrients of other life which passed on before us, before one day we ourselves will be reduced down to simple nutrients that feed the next one. Maybe it's just the same energy, the same elements and atoms passing between forms, but as far as we can perceive from our limited stature, as far as we include our will and input as conscious beings, things are guaranteed to change. I mean, even if you wake up tomorrow and decide to eat the same breakfast, get in the car at the exact same millisecond and drink the same exact volume of coffee, go through the exact same course of actions that you had today, it would still be a different day because the material comprising you is different. The amount of your total life that the day comprised was less. Undeniably, change is certain. This provides the basis for understanding a specific kind of change, the one from hero to villain. Why do heroes turn into villains? How can these be intentional acts of good? And if that's all true, if a hero can so easily become a villain, well, what even is the truth of it all? Given that I said the words hero and truth within the same minute, it's an easy guess that we're talking about Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear series, and since we've already covered 1 and 2 in order, well, you know that today it's 3. It takes a large step back from 2009 when Sons of Liberty takes place, occurring in 1964, and what a time it was. Since the 1960s began, the Bay of Pigs invasion failed and the Cuban Missile Crisis put the world on alert, the US is getting deeper into Vietnam and the Berlin Wall is starting to go up, John F. Kennedy is assassinated, and China just developed its first atomic bomb. Safe to say, the world was a lot different then than it is now, and even a lot different than it was 20 years earlier from '64 when the Second World War ended. World War II was fought with defined fronts and strategies. Attacks focused on regaining land and stopping a military complex that was seeking to exterminate entire groups and take over the whole world. Honor and pride were easy terms, and good and evil felt well defined. But now, in the Cold War, well, your active combat zone was either dense jungles where enemies intermingled with civilians, or it was information. Between the world powers, you didn't directly attack each other, but instead fought proxy battles, sent in spies to collect documents, bribed officers for intelligence, anything to get that next bit of information that could let you know what world-ending weapons to develop, but hopefully never use. War had changed. This shifts the role of an ideal soldier, of someone you could call a hero as well. They weren't storming beaches or charging the front lines. They didn't know for certain that they were defending goodness against total evil. They were sneaking, trying to leave behind as little a trace as possible, all while wondering what honor and glory really meant anymore. This is the context we find the boss in, the mentor of our main character Naked Snake and a hero of World War II. In Metal Gear lore, she was integral to major battles like Normandy and celebrated as a hero who made Axis defeat possible. She embodies the skills of that era and maybe even further back, the ability to fight in enclosed spaces of a trench, to charge in on a horse to take a beating and get right back up. The boss is exactly what the 1940s called for. But they called for it because there was a great evil doing many of the same things, taking massive amounts of land through direct attacks, setting up fronts which needed to be broken. Her skills were honed and crafted to fight the evil plaguing the earth at that time, and to an extreme degree with how much of a hero she was and how much she did. There was no room for her to be anything but those skills. The boss doesn't have friends outside of her unit or family, and in fact the one time she tried, her son was taken away. And she does pass something on to the next generation, but it's these skills she leaves with Snake, just an extension of her job as a soldier. To be so good at it, well, this is all she could be. Plus, time is a factor. She's been these things for a while, her body breaking down from exercising them. A newer, younger soldier has an easier time turning inexperience into experience than an older one has in changing the kind of experience. There'll be a better investment than a hero whose age is soon to catch up to them, making it almost logical to leave the hero behind. So, as she crafts and then uses those skills against the evil, eventually destroying it, well, this is what happens. She's left behind, and mostly because her place is gone by her own hand. There is no war demanding everything she's gotten so good at exactly because she was so good at it. Further, a world that's now become sick of it exists, and accustomed to dealing with such direct combat, doesn't want to see it anymore. It's not as effective from its prolonged presence, and calls for it will be met with bad memories of recent losses. The world transitioned to information for many reasons, but one of them was simply that war had made everyone sick of war. The heroes of that era rose to the occasion, became exactly what was required of it to end it, and from that are left purposefully obsolete and obscure. We see this in the contrast between her missions and Snake's. He's not storming any beaches. He's using advanced technology to infiltrate enemy bases and retrieve defectors and information, focusing on being more of a ghost than anything else, so that total deniability remains and diplomacy reigns. To have someone who can ride a horse into battle in the age of information is just about laughable. The ideal soldier just isn't what it once was. All of this is why they either die a hero or become a villain. By their own hand, they defeat the need for themselves, and from the dedication required, were allowed to be nothing else. To try and maintain their importance into the new era, they can only ever pull the world back to what it was, not push it forward. They can only ever become the villain. And so, as Snake is sent into Russia to try and reclaim a once defected but traded back scientist named Sokolov, the boss is on comms as information assistance. That is until Snake almost succeeds and finds her waiting at the end, providing a miniature warhead to the enemy commander, Volgin. She attacks Snake, easily wins, and tosses him over the bridge to die. The boss has defected, back to direct fighting, but this time for the enemy. Kind of. Because, spoiler warning for like a 20-year-old game, back out now if you're not ready, as the end of the game reveals, the boss's defection was actually a US plan to get the most out of an aging and soon-to-be useless hero. She couldn't fight for her country anymore, but she could be what they fight against. Because think about what crafted the boss into a hero to begin with. Large villains. Men with ambitions to take over the entire world and replace it with what they believed to be ideal. The reason why her skills needed to be at such a great level, while they had the stage to be expressed and make her a hero, was because there was someone of great strength and immoral will to fight against. A deeper dive into this concept comes from the previous entry, Sons of Liberty, where a whiny rookie is turned onto a soldier on par with Solid Snake across just one mission. Now, as Snake stresses at the end of that game, it is still Raiden's will, his strength and determination to see the options he was manipulated into having through. However, that doesn't deny that that time was still a large part of making him a hero. We don't make the times make us. So, with the boss recognizing these changing times, and in fact, even playing a part in training the next generation to replace her in Naked Snake, of course she sees that for a true replacement, some of the conditions will have to be replicated. She can kickstart that next generation, make the hero of this time, by becoming the villain which they fight. That will and determination, the youth and energy will be directed into the stuff of legends by fighting one, molded under pressure into something greater like carbon into a diamond. Just look at how Snake changes across this mission, which begins once again after one of those miniature warheads is launched at Sokolov's facility, and more importantly, after the boss easily could have killed him. He hardly stands a chance against her superior technique and strength, despite being her direct student. And the reason is likely that he hasn't had such an important challenge. His mentality thus far is that he simply follows orders, saying things like this:
I follow the president and the top brass. I'm ready to die for them if necessary.
He's kind of fighting just to fight, like going to work, but instead of a desk, it's combat. But once the boss is involved, once it's personal and imperative and against someone so strong, he actually begins to grow, with each successive battle standing more and more ground against the boss, until, in the end, he bests her and ends her life. It was the direction of that energy, that ability to make it personal, to make it not war but duty, which allows him to grow. A hero against a villain. And at the same time, this reveals how it isn't just the boss being loyal to her country, but actually continuing her own legacy, leaving behind a hero who will enforce her will. If the hero is responding to the villain, then what the villain represents will be what the hero has to oppose. If the boss is a traitor, someone who lacks loyalty, then Snake must be someone who maintains it instead. And from his interactions with Eva, a triple spy who assists him throughout the mission, we know this is true. If the boss represents division, then Snake becomes unity by preventing her from fanning the flames of this conflict, stopping the woman who provided advanced weapons to the enemy. Those ideals, like unity and loyalty, from everything the boss says, we know those are the most important things in the world to her. She would even kill her former love to be able to keep expressing them. And that's why she acts against them. Because Snake will cut his chops in the name of those things and carry them on into the next mission, just as she did in her heroic times. By becoming the villain, she secures everything she cared for, but was no longer allowed to express. Of course, this calls into question why that matters though. Is it actually right for a hero's will to survive into the next era if we know that the times are requiring different responses? We can start to find the answer in a combination of things the boss says. First, she states,
People aren't the ones who dictate the missions.
Then who does?
The times.
And this is followed later in the conversation by,
The only thing we can believe in with absolute certainty is the mission, Jack.
Taken together, it's saying that the times have a huge influence on the only things we can believe in. For example, say like Snake, you plan to be loyal by pledging yourself to your country. Well, what does that actually make you loyal to? In the 1940s, the United States was sending soldiers over the ocean to stop the spread of fascism. In the 1960s, the United States was sending soldiers over the ocean to stop the spread of communism, a spread originating from one of the countries which helped them stop fascism to be able to try and stop communism to begin with. It's too vast to be anything cohesive. The leaders changed, and the people's minds changed, and the purpose of the missions changed. Hell, we see time and time again in Snake Eater that even being on the same side as someone doesn't mean jack shit, with numerous troopers killed by their own leaders, so can a side really have loyalty at all? To believe in something as wide as a country to express your ideal is to believe in almost nothing at all. Which, well, that calls into question the point of being a hero at all. If you're just going to defeat your own purpose for a world that bastardized the very thing you fought for, what good can you really do? Well, there can only be a point if you do like the boss did. If you care not for the expression, for the label of hero or villain, but for the ideals truly at the heart and how to make an expression which actually maintains them happen in these times. For example, the boss was fighting on America's side in the Second World War, but she was never fighting simply for a country. She was fighting for unity, which simply coincided with America's efforts in World War II. To defeat the Axis powers, an axe which demanded the two almost diametrically opposed ideologies would come together, that was something which created unity, that common villain to give them the same purpose. Everyone was fighting for the same next step of the world. Whatever they felt should come after, that one thing had to come first for all people. In that era of conflict, unity was achieved through defeating the bringer of war, through waging it yourself against them, and so she was with America to achieve her ideal. But in this era of peace, well, her use as a hero, the skills she developed to change the world, those just don't fit anymore. A soldier is good at making war, and in this new context, war would just be destroying the unity. She can't fight for America anymore as they begin to create divisions instead, becoming an agent of the philosophers. In Metal Gear lore, basically a secret organization composed of people from all of the world leaders. As such, they'll make decisions for the world and not just for one nation. But as their members die out, the same thing happens to them as did to the Allies, with the funds they amassed being divided and used for selfish reasons, namely Volgin, who inherited a majority. And so with that option eliminated, there's not much left to do, except of course what's obvious from our discussion so far. Become the villain, which once again brings those world powers together, and even more, steal back those funds and recreate that body of unity. As each side is trying to steal information and plant nukes within striking range, tensions close to boiling again and again, this is an era where avoiding the worst is what unity means sometimes. There needs to be somewhere for the blame to go when caught to avoid the worst division possible. In this case, the US needs an excuse for why their agents were near a nuclear detonation on Soviet soil, and the Soviets need an excuse for their own mishaps, why one of their officers actually launched that nuke. And each gets to use the boss as an excuse. In the context of the times, Unity was averting crisis, and her death allows both sides to achieve exactly that. Over her own life even, she valued this quality. And while this merely postponed the issue, it does leave behind a potential solution from all of that villain creating the motivation stuff that we've already discussed. Because while she isn't around to prevent the next disaster, what's left behind is Snake. Someone who knows the truth of what happened and who's strong enough to use that truth exactly because she made him so. He knows firsthand that something just one person believed in, unity, was able to extend beyond the current situation and be achieved in all times, even if its expression seems so different. Proof that the hero could live well beyond the label, and as such he has no reason to not try the same for himself. A new generation, right for the times, with more youth on his side and everything he needs to push this world in the right direction. The boss lives on in an even larger form than before. Big Boss. And with how Kojima messily concluded the series in the next entry, that worked out exactly as she planned. But the mess of Metal Gear Solid 4 is a very different story for a different day. All this lying in theater starts to shape one of this entry's main points as well. The world is not shaped by facts, it is shaped by stories. Like the inspiration a hero feels against a villain, the best way to get the world to action is with captivating narratives. We see this with Shagohod, the weapon that Snake is sent in to stop as part of his mission. Now don't get me wrong, this beast is a terrible thing. A supposedly all-terrain vehicle capable of nuclear strikes across oceans without the need for a silo and all that infrastructure, that's almost a literal plague released into the world. It should not exist. And so it's good that it doesn't. While Shagohod is some of what it's stated to be, it's not all of it. It doesn't have the proper context of what's required for it to be that. The all-terrain thing is applicable, but not to the nuclear strike capabilities, which require a runway that's 3 miles long so that it can boost itself up to speed with literal rockets. Yes, instead of adding more power to the already existing rocket, they just put more rockets on the tank shooting the rocket instead. And what's considered to be a long runway is at the top end 2.5 miles, so this thing actually does need specialized infrastructure to launch its strike, so it's no different from building a silo because your enemy will see from satellite imaging and flyovers that you are doing so and be just as prepared as if it were a regular nuclear strike. I can only assume that this is an intentional detail in a game which shows itself to be a purposeful parody time and time again, like being set in a Russian jungle with a major who wears cowboy boots with actual spurs and spins his revolvers in intricate tricks which double as a game of triple gun Russian roulette but with only one bullet, and then this is how that man summons his troops. Coming from the man who made a game in part to tell gamers, you're not a legendary soldier, you're a whiny kid in the basement, these things are supposed to be stupid, Shagohod included. You're supposed to feel almost a bit cheated or silly at how asinine it is, and realize that both sides were just telling the story that it needed to justify their actions. The USSR, or at least specifically Volgin, uses it as an excuse to justify his own excited sadism, because anything he does now is lesser damage than the help of the total control a doomsday machine provides. And the US can claim the same reason that they have to do everything to stop the USSR, because, well, they're about to have a functional death machine to take total control of the world. They both need to get all the funding and all the motivation from their workers that they need. Everything that happens in the story does so because the narrative of this world's end is hanging overhead. It's why Volgin says, "Remember the Alamo," when he nukes his own country. Because, yes, that's a terrible thing for his side, but it's a great story. A rallying cry that will make men fight with their entire lives against a country so evil that it will use nuclear weapons on innocent people once again. The losses will be recuperated by the gains. The best motivation isn't facts in the right context. It's the story that can be told through some of those facts in whatever context. And this is why Shagohod even exists over other designs in the first place, because such a silly machine fit the prevailing narrative. It didn't feel silly for those times. The parody-like designs of Sokolov wasn't the only option, as Granin, a heroic weapons designer from the World War II era, had his own concept for an all-terrain nuclear-capable weapon, one you might have heard of. It's called Metal Gear. As we know from the rest of the series, which is defined by that machine, it is a truly terrible and fearsome thing, exactly what the Soviet Union was claiming to have in Shagohod. Plus, it was designed by someone who actually cared to be doing so and to be doing it for them. Sokolov is a man who already defected once and is actually trying to do so again. He's only made to complete his work under constant supervision and with torture being levied against others if he does not. Granin, well, this is what he has to say about it.
Unlike Sokolov, the thought of defecting has never once crossed my mind. I love this land.
So why the hell did they go with the clearly less effective and more difficult solution? And you can probably guess, because it was the better story. This is the space age, rockets are all the rage, and Sokolov was a technician who helped the Soviet Union win the first leg of that race by getting a man up there first. That is, he is a story which represents their victory. His design's an extension of the way in which they've already bested the US. They saw their win and felt confident applying it to the next situation, even if it was such an ill fit, because it felt good. It felt motivating to say, the man who helped us beat those pigs is going to do so again. All the leaders' attention flocked to him and his achievements, each one hearing the news of the new toys, and also wanting to get their name attached to this idea of victory. Imagine being the man who made that move. So Granin, a relic of the old age whose utilitarian designs helped win a dirty war of direct conflict, he's of no use in the modern age when they have someone like Sokolov. At least that's what the story would say, but we know it's anything but that. These leaders took the path of best headline, and this is their downfall because all they were chasing was a meaningless victory. What did the space race actually achieve for them? What did they get from a man leaving the atmosphere? They got to say they did it and nothing more. And the US beat them to the moon to be able to say they won instead anyway, both sides confident in their victory on goalposts they choose. It's the idea of victory, that's it. As the boss describes it, the space race is just the next theater for meaningless conflict. And Granin helps to prove everything the boss said by being a similar case with a different outcome. He was a hero who wished to remain one, but who, like the boss, was a hero for his era. He designed weapons for gritty frontline combat, accompaniments to soldiers, not death fortresses. We see this in Metal Gear, something which does have those capabilities, but is also much more like a soldier than Shagohod was, walking on two legs across the terrain to face enemies directly, rather than being confined to a base with support. He even describes it as the missing link between soldier and artillery to stress this, and of course to introduce a hint of genetics because Hideo Kojima wrote this. But the heart of it is that he isn't designing for the style of this era, and no matter how much better his design was, it simply won't fit the times to actually help to allow him to be a hero, and yet that's what his expertise is, so he can't change up so easily. He can't just change that style willy-nilly. What this means is that, like the boss, the option available to him was to become the villain instead, show his former comrades what they had lost, and give them something greater to fight, to make his country hate him so it could rise to the occasion. But he doesn't, because he didn't care about something this union represented, some quality shared between his experiences here. He simply cared for the collection, the name, and the nationalism. He cared for the place where he would have an advantage, able to drink himself silly on the job with no one checking on him. The US wouldn't accept that kind of behavior from a defector who had to prove themselves for sure. Even if he hates this state of affairs, it is a comfort allowed to him from this specific collection, not any of its traits. And so he can't leave it because he has nothing to take with him when he goes, no important ideal to stoke within them from villainy. Without that, of course it will just look like irredeemable and selfish villainy, even as it entirely discards the self. In the end of his story is being tortured for information he doesn't have, tossed aside as useless scraps from a bygone era, having kept himself in a place where he had no cause. The nation he loved was no longer the winners of the great patriotic war, instead now just the sadism of Volgin, but loyalty to the name kept him nonetheless. This is the downfall of what the boss calls loyalty to the end.
Loyalty to the end. Do you know what it means? It means devoting yourself to your country. People's values change over time, and so do the leaders of a country. The enemies we fight are only enemies in relative terms, constantly changing with the times. As long as we have loyalty to the end, there's no point in believing in anything, even in those we love.
Based on the general location the boss specifies, it's likely a reference to the extreme loyalty of soldiers everywhere, but of course of the Imperial soldiers in World War II. Under a long-standing tradition of collective over the self, where true loyalty could only be born after a willingness to die, in a war where men threw themselves off cliffs over surrendering, and deliberately gave their own lives to attack the foe's ships, where some fought for years after the war was over, in one case for almost 30 years because his orders were to never surrender or take his own life until his direct superior told him otherwise. Under all of that, loyalty had cost the world so much. The fighting past surrender, the families who lost sons and brothers and fathers that could have survived, even the civilians who did the same, the loyalty that people felt to nation over even their families, a formless, shapeless mass which would be working with the exact nations it attempted to destroy no more than 10 years later. All of it robbed the world of more important things, the ones which make the reason a nation can even be supported to begin with. It's seen best in the letter from a soldier to his mother, who knew he was about to use his own life to kill enemy soldiers only a few days later. Ichizo Hayashi, 23 years old, wrote, "I am pleased to have the honor of having been chosen as a member of a special attack force that is on its way into battle, but I cannot help crying when I think of you, Mum. When I reflect on the hopes you had for my future, I feel so sad that I am going to die without doing anything to bring you joy." This was not a mindless automaton throwing himself into the flames of combat. This was a real person who just felt loyalty to something that didn't feel loyalty to him. That's what loyalty to the end does. It leaves people with no reason to exist. And in the name of what? A cause that won't even exist in 10 years? A leader who will be voted out in the next 5? A shapeless, formless mass which mangles ideals into manipulative calls, removing everything personal which could actually better us within them to instead appeal to another shapeless, formless mass of simply citizens without names. Loyalty alone isn't what props up great nations and causes. Loyalty alone allows travesty, forgives crimes, never questions ideas better left in the dust. What does the hard work is loyalty to the constituent principles, to the ideals at the heart of a nation or a cause. Loyalty to unity for goodness, and loyalty to hate for evil. Loyalty to family and a mixture of selflessness and selfishness or expression or anything in the same way. Loyalty and those other ideals don't mean that the expression is going to cause good or evil. But it does mean that they're there, existing well past the names and faces, a consistency that societies need to keep moving. It stops us from running in circles, repeating the lessons we swore to never forget. Like the boss, you don't devote yourself to the nation. You devote yourself to what you love about the nation, and as times shift, you find whatever way you can to express that, or bring it back, whatever friend or enemy and hero or villain. This is what we need for any of it to mean anything at all. And where does Snake fit into this? Well, to be honest, sometimes in the background. The story of the man who goes on to be Big Boss is just starting, as he spends his time in the game listening and growing, trying to understand what the boss could never teach him, how to think like a soldier. He has the techniques, the expression, but for what cause? As he speaks to her at the beginning, explaining his devotion to the country, to whatever leader is in charge, that's when he's weak and beaten by her time and time again. But as it turns simply from orders he must see through to something personal, as he faces down the boss's squad, the Cobras, with their emotional names, the fear, the pain, the end, the sorrow, the fury, and the joy, to see that this isn't something he can simply follow but must decide. He grows into a much stronger and more capable man who can best his mentor from all these emotions and this personal nature. Loved and betrayed, manipulated and broken, it's impossible for him to return to believing in whatever the times call for. He's seen too much, feels too much to be able to do that now. He has ideas much too important for that, the will of a true patriot to see through. A mission that doesn't just end when he salutes the commanding officer. Just as the boss, he won't be loyal to the end, but to the ends, to his goal. So he goes to meet the president, does his duty, and sits through the lies and the photo op, receives all this praise for killing a terrible traitor while knowing that it's just the story that covers their asses, and leaves with no love left for something so formless and shapeless as to forget the heroes which made it possible. While the entire world's beliefs will be abused, his alone won't be. So if you want something true, if you want to be strong, look at something much greater than the nation. Look at yourself, the people comprising it, giving it power to begin with. What do you believe? What would you be the villain for? What will you pass on? Oh, an important note, I'm actually going to slot this in at the start of the outro. There are a few links in the pinned comment for this one for a little bit of the research I did for this video, where I got that one quote from the letter that the soldier wrote to his mother, as well as just some general history and the fact-checking for those quotes at the beginning as well and their sources. So that'll be all linked down there if that's something you want to check out. Any video that requires a little bit of history, this one was more like the broad strokes, so it didn't need too much, but anything that covers that, I don't really want to speak out of turn. And so if I did, let me know. If there's like something you think was just factually wrong about this, tell me so I can correct it for future things. I'd like to be wrong if it means I can make better things later. Anyway, that will wrap things up for this one. I finally get to say that for once because it isn't an aggressively super long video. I don't know, there's a certain like struggle with writing where when you feel like you're close to the idea, like the last video that I put out, I don't think it's bad, but I think it was just missing something, and it was so long and a little bit repetitive because it was like I was 90% of the way there and just kept going, maybe this wording, maybe this wording, maybe this wording, and adding new stuff to it, and the idea kind of went in a few different ways that it was just like too big of a series to tackle everything of all at once, and the idea grew into saying it so many different ways, trying to find that right wording and like the line between all those things that came into it. I don't know, it's an interesting process. It's like the most difficult part of writing is when you're 90% of the way there, not like everything before that's fine, and then that last little bit. I don't know. It was like supposed to be a quick video and became that. And that's why this one is great, because it actually was a quick video. I originally wanted to save this one for the release date of Metal Gear Solid Delta, which is the remake of this game, but I was just like, this is the idea I want to talk about right now. And I'm glad I did, because it was the smoothest, maybe the smoothest process of any video I have ever put together. Actually, no, it did struggle at first, and I was in a bit of a funk. But the second I broke that funk was actually, I was like thinking about this, and I was like, I was sitting there and going like, oh man, I'm in this really weird place with like writing and so on. And I thought about a little bit of philosophy and so on, and I went, wait a minute, oh, I can do this. And I wrote out like the core ideas in like 30 minutes, went back and expanded on them, and like the script came out immediately, recorded all in one day. Fantastic. Great video to put together. I hope you enjoyed it, because I really fucking did. It also opens the door for me to talk about Metal Gear Solid 4, which is only 9 hours of cutscenes. Yay! But I think I'm going to talk about that one in a different way. I think I'm going to cover the story behind that and like what it really says about being forced to keep creating something that used to mean something to you, but like feeling it fall off as you keep being forced to add more to it than you ever meant. I'm gonna dig in some interviews with like what Kojima actually said about that process and more of like the story behind how that game really became like, okay, fill in all the holes, make this story impossible to continue so that I never have to write it again. And I think that'll be interesting to put together. Anyway, I probably shouldn't make the outro too long because then watch time tanks and analytics and stuff I hate. I just want to write things. I'm happy that you're all here listening to the stupid things I write. Anyway, I guess that wraps things up for this one. Important links in the pinned comment as well as the sources I mentioned. And just thank you to everyone, patrons and members especially, for supporting me in this weird, wild thing where I get to talk about a game that I thought was cool when I was 10. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.